Since Disney purchased Star Wars in 2012, we've gotten a steady stream of content ever since. While some content has been truly great, there's been others that have been not so great. What makes Star Wars great in 2021? We're here to answer that question on another exciting edition of A Cast to the Past, where we have a brand new episode each and every Sunday. Joining me today, Keith Hamilton from London, Ontario.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm feeling good. I feel like the Force is with us today, you know? We're going to talk about my favorite thing on the planet, Star Wars, or I guess my favorite thing in a galaxy far, far away would be the right answer. But anyway, Star Wars, good stuff. Yeah.
So we're not quite at Star Wars Day, May the 4th, but Keith had brought up, after seeing The Mandalorian Season 2 recently, a very interesting question that we'll be, aiming to answer in this episode about what makes modern Star Wars great. What are those elements, and, what are elements that make some of the newer Star Wars stuff not so great? But the first thing,
like you said, we've gotten a lot of Star Wars in the last couple of years, and as it's gone on, in my opinion anyway, it's gotten better and better, and the things that at the time I thought were good, well, there's things that have come along that kind of show, well, maybe it wasn't as good as I thought it was. And then it really got me thinking about what exactly makes good Star Wars these days, because I think it's a very different formula than what made Star Wars great as a franchise back in its infancy.
It's true. And one thing I did want to open up with you first is, so we're talking new Star Wars, Force Awakens and beyond. What has been your favorite piece of new Star Wars content, movie or TV show?
I'm gonna have to say it's a really hard question just because the honest answer is I love almost all of it, but I'm gonna have to go with the final season of the Clone Wars available on Disney Plus. It is so good that it's kind of split out into 3 arcs that season, and 2 out of 3 of the arcs are some of my favorite Star Wars ever, especially that last one, because they do such a fun job. I won't ruin it if you haven't seen it, and please, if you even just like Star Wars, go watch it on Disney Plus. They do such a fun job of integrating the show into Revenge of the Sith and almost breathing new life into Revenge of the Sith, which is one of my favorite Star Wars movies, so it was fun that it added a new layer and a new depth to that movie as well, just by being good content.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of great things about Clone Wars. I started in season 1. I know people say it gets better.
Clone Wars is hard because there's no good, you need to start this at season 1 or season 3 or whatever. It's kind of like you need to watch these specific episodes. Here is a list of the good episodes.
I know it jumbles all over the place, but I figured, okay, if I watch it in the order of aired episodes, then there's at least, it was built to somewhat, in mind, because that's how it aired, right?
You need to be willing to just stop an episode, because there are some that are very much, this is a children's cartoon, and it is really rough to watch as an adult. So you just need to be willing to let this go. If you see Jar Jar Binks in an episode, you can skip it. And it's just simple that way.
I did see one Jar Jar Binks episode, and it wasn't even that bad. It was nice to get a little bit more of these characters, because they're so, the prequel characters can be really boring and wooden in the movies, but it was nice to see a different side of those characters, have them be much more interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
And I just need to continue it. I don't even think I finished season 1, but I did start watching it, and it's something I do plan to go back to. And it'll be a good thing to kind of watch a couple episodes before you go to bed or something.
Absolutely.
So definitely plan to revisit it, because I have heard it gets really, really good in some of the later seasons.
And that last season, it's cream a la crop. I want to tell you everything that happens, but I know that's not okay.
Yeah. But kind of getting to the big question at hand about what makes the Disney era of Star Wars good? What are, we should say, the good aspects? Because we know there's definitely movies we don't like. I know you're not a fan of Solo. I'm not really a fan of The Last Jedi. And I think we can both agree that Rise of Skywalker was a complete mess. It had some good parts to it, but it was a complete mess.
Rise of Skywalker was okay. When we talk about the things that have gotten worse because there are better things, I am mostly talking about Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, and I would agree there. So, we look at the prequels with Star Wars, and that's an area where we say, okay, George Lucas had full reign, and he definitely, to quote himself, went a little too far in some places. Mm-hmm. And it ended up being, at the time, they were panned universally. Then, there's been a little bit of reform for the prequels, I think, in part because...
Yeah, that's been fascinating. Just how there's this, second wave of love for the prequels that have happened.
It's the generation that really grew up with that as their Star Wars, right? We were kind of... The way we grew up, I think, obviously we weren't born when these movies came out. Then... there was the 90s where they kind of came back to theaters, but we grew up with those kind of being our movies. And then the prequels were in theaters when we're I guess the episode 1 came out and we were still in, I think, elementary school maybe, but
yeah, it was from the time we were 10-ish. It was our preteens that came out.
Yeah. I think it's more maybe the kids that, episode 1 was their first Star Wars movie, but nevertheless, there's been a little bit of reform. I think part of that is the Clone Wars adding more context to these movies, and then the memes, the prequel memes, have taken on a life of their own, and it makes people enjoy the movies either ironically or unironically. And that helps. And I mean, come on, Revenge of the Sith is a good movie, but yeah, there's really no forgiving movie. Clone Wars. It's just, it's really, it's hard to, maybe I'll hear an argument for Phantom Menace, but it's tough to defend Clone Wars.
See,
nevertheless,
if you just cut out the first 2 acts of Clone Wars, I think there's something there.
Yeah.
The Geonosis part was cool. The other stuff, it's... As a diehard
towards the end,
Star
it gets
Wars
better,
fan,
but that whole middle section of the movie it's brutal.
I hate sand. It gets everywhere, and it's rugged. I hate it.
But nevertheless, right? The prequels were kind of we've kind of viewed as a down point, and then Force Awakens comes out, and it's like, man, Star Wars is back. That was a lot of fun. Is it A New Hope? Kind of reimagined in a way? Yes.
100%.
But did I walk out of that theater being like, that was awesome? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So the big question comes up, looking at Force Awakens and beyond, what are the elements that made those parts of Star Wars, your favorite Star Wars content? What has made it good in your mind?
I do think that the ability to have fun with it helps a lot. It's the stuff that you don't really have to look too deep into. It's not like Star Wars isn't exactly a philosophical franchise, right? If you see the spaceships and the lightsabers and the characters you love, or even just teases of the characters you love, to me, that's what makes it good these days. I think in hindsight, The Force Awakens took it a little too far, just because you can go on YouTube and find shot by shot remakes that the movie took from A New Hope. That's a little too much leaning on the nostalgia side, but it's these interesting stories that they're telling with the stuff around the movies these days that kind of has a little hint or a little subtle nudge or a conclusion that brushes the old Star Wars or brushes the Star Wars that you love, or even just a little piece of it being a character or a relic or a planet that was made famous in the Star Wars of yesteryear. I think think that adds a lot of fun to it. And when you're watching one of the biggest franchises ever, that is, and let's be honest, it is a more kid-centric franchise that is just like adult-based nostalgia around it. It's supposed to be fun, and that's when it's at its best.
Yeah. And I would say Force Awakens, I think, in my opinion, the two best pieces of content to come out in the Disney era is The Mandalorian and The Force Awakens. I think those, in my opinion, those are my two personal favorite, and I think they are the most well executed. Do they both have problems? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But are they very enjoyable? 100%.
100%. I feel like The Mandalorian is its own conversation, though.
Yes, yeah, and we'll get to The Mandalorian, especially because there's a kind of a second question that we'll be getting to that I think is something that's becoming maybe an issue for future Star Wars that I'm very interested to hear your take. But in terms of The Force Awakens, there are definitely times where I think they lean too heavily on the past. But I think The Force Awakens also did an amazing job of introducing new characters and making them interesting and likable. Now, what they did with those characters in future movies is a different conversation. But I think Rey, Finn, Poe didn't get too much screen time, but Kylo Ren are all characters that I really enjoyed after seeing The Force Awakens. Like Finn was one of my favorite characters coming out of Force Awakens. And then
the arc of Finn is such that's maybe one of the biggest disappointments of this generation of Star Wars.
It was so good in Force Awakens, and then it was completely destroyed in The Last Jedi, and I thought,
and then they did nothing for him. They just gave him a little tease in Rise of Skywalker.
I thought
they
were going to do more with him, and then I was super disappointed by that. Yeah, I mean, there was so much you could have done with like an ex-stormtrooper that really it was a lot of wasted potential.
Agreed. And then there was strong key points in the Rise of Skywalker that they just never executed on, where he kind of teased like, hey Rey, I kind of feel the Force, but they never actually say it or do anything with it because they're just trying to cram so much into that damn movie it got lost at the end of it. Yep.
I mean, as much as, like I said, I think we even talked about this before, but as much as I did not like some of the direction they took with The Last Jedi, they should have just let Rian Johnson keep the thing to just finish out his vision, because the jumping back and forth between here's J.J. Abrams,
I disagree
setting the table
with that. I almost take the other side of things, where as the new trilogy concluded, I was disappointed that Rian Johnson got a kick at the old can. I almost feel like The Last Jedi, and I will say that, like, me talking in 2021 here, enjoys The Last Jedi significantly less than I did when I first saw it, just because it felt like if they would have just let J.J. Abrams tell his story in the 3 movies, there wouldn't have been this need to cram it all into the to the Rise of Skywalker.
Don't get me wrong. I agree with you there. My thinking was from the point of Last Jedi's already happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say just let Rian Johnson do the third one like he was supposed to. That was kind of my thinking was, okay, if you're starting from the beginning, like Force Awakens happened, sure, let JJ do the whole thing. But if you're at the point where it's like 2017, I think, and Last Jedi is already done in theaters and people are raging, I still think it would have been better. I get what they were coming from, and I was actually at the time, this is more of like a playing Monday morning quarterback. Like at the time I was like, yes, give it back to JJ. But, part of me did also think, okay, he's going to have to undo everything in The Last Jedi to get his movie.
Well, and he kind of did.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. And the movie suffered for it because there was just too much to get through. But we're talking about what makes good Star Wars in 2021. So we'll get back on the rails here a bit. And I do want to say, because a lot of this is coming out of, like I said, the prequel trilogy. What are the good aspects that they did? And I would say embracing, there's a ton of CGI, but embracing more practical effects in real sets.
That was one of the best decisions they made with
it's what made Star Wars feel like Star Wars again. Rey on Tatooine and so the sets on the Mandalorian. It makes that more grittier kind of filter to it. It made it feel more like, 70s, 80s kind of Star Wars look and feel. Made it feel like things had weight to them. The big problem with the prequels is just like everything is like in front of these green screens and
it's just too clean.
Yeah,
I get it's like the center of the universe, the most like the fanciest planet on the universe in Coruscant, but it just looks so fake and clean and good. And that's not Star Wars.
Yeah. And that's one element that it's like they knew they had to kind of counter the prequels in that respect, and I think they did a good job. Now, what are there any other elements that you come to mind, kind of through points you see in the Star Wars media you like, that you see kind of trending across in new Star Wars that maybe it's a little bit different? Is it like humor or things like that you feel like they've done a better job with in new Star Wars versus prequels, or even maybe the original trilogy?
A thing that I've really enjoyed that they're leaning into, and this kind of leads into our second point, so sorry, I'm going to kind of brute force it here, but I like the fact that everything doesn't need to be this galaxy-wide like crisis and this galaxy-wide issue, because in the when we're talking about when they were building the Star Wars universe back in the 80s, it was exactly that, a universe, a galaxy far, far away. It's not just this one thing happening. There are billions, trillions of other things happening that affect people differently, not on this global scale, or I guess this galaxy scale. So the little stories that if you expand it out into the scope of the movies, they don't mean much, but the stories that they're telling in stuff like Rebels, in stuff like the Clone Wars, where it's just these micro episodes, where it's just this is one conflict on a planet, in things like The Mandalorian, it doesn't need to be this galaxy-wide, galaxy-ending crisis happening constantly. And I think that's been the most fascinating part of Star Wars, because when they bring in a character that is on that galaxy-wide scale, they feel cool, and they feel awesome. And that is when Star Wars is again at its best.
I totally agree. I really enjoy Mandalorian, and that's, most of what I've seen, so that's my best reference. But Mandalorian having these smaller side quests, if you will, that it does feel almost like a video game. And actually one of my friends called that out about, he's like, Mandalorian's it's like Skyrim or something. There's
it's
the main.
It's a really fine line though, because there are some instances in Mandalorian, and it's the one episode. There's one episode from each season that I don't like, where it almost feels a little too low scale. It feels a little too TV drama for me, where they just lower the stakes of this episode quest a little too much. So it's a very fine line that they draw.
Hey, thanks for checking out the video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing, and we are also available on podcast feeds. So search the name, click on the Sword and Stone, and enjoy a brand new episode every single Sunday.